Hi guys, thanks for joining me again. In this video today I'm going to be discussing the inverted returner serve, but for close to the table players who are standing within a metre, 3 to 4 feet, fairly much close up to the table, rather than being a long range defender playing away. So we're looking at I guess players who are playing aggressively or passively, the blend between, but the emphasis being that rather than being a long way away from the table, we're staying in general fairly up. Okay, so that's where our focus is going to be. Now, for the long range defending, I broke it up into the 3 basic groups: the modern defender, the pick hitting defender, and the more traditional defender. I think for this one, for the actual close to table players, rather than saying let's talk about the passive defensive guys and the aggressive guys, rather than splitting that up, because it's more like the two extremes, I think what I'll do instead is I'll talk about the different types of serve that you'll get coming to you, to your inverted side, and then I'll discuss the returns that you can make, and then whether they're more suited to passive play or more aggressive play. I think that kind of will make more logical sense, mainly because I don't think people tend to be one extreme or the other extreme, but at different times we're a blend between the two. There are people at either side, but generally we're all somewhere in the spectrum, using some aggressive things, using some passive things, more or less. So I think by handling just each type of return and saying, well, this is a more passive, this is a more aggressive, I think you can then pick and choose what you want. So I think that's kind of the way to go. Okay, let's start, again, I think probably start with the simplest stuff, which is in this case for an inverted returner serve, for close to the table players, the long serve. What do we want to do? So let's have a look at our options and we'll discuss how passive or aggressive they are. So typically speaking, what we're talking about here is we're going to have the inverted on the forehand. Okay, it doesn't really matter if the inverted's on the backhand, but it's the principles are the same, but for simplicity's sake I'll talk about the inverted on the forehand, and we're getting a long serve. So by long serve I really just mean one that's bouncing once and coming off the end, or even possibly maybe not quite coming off the end but bouncing high enough that you can attack it. So from a long serve I think you could just pretty much read attackable. Okay, but generally one bounce somewhere off the end, whether the ball's mid-table, coming just off the end, or bouncing very, very deep from a good fast serve. So let's have a look at our options. What can we do as close to the table players? Well, we could, I guess, start with, depending on the serve, because there's going to be different types. There could be side spin on it, side spin and back spin, side spin and top spin, pure back spin, pure top spin. Okay, so we've got already a variety of serves. So rather than talking about lots of little specifics, let's talk about the generalities, and you can adjust them as you go. What should we be looking for? Okay, now we could play safe, and by playing safe I mean just making sure that firstly we get the ball back onto the table, and from a deep serve, if the ball's coming off the end, it's going to be quite difficult to drop the ball very, very short. And the reason why is simply because by the time you make contact with the ball on a deeper serve that's coming off the end, you are generally going to be making that contact. The ball's probably going to bounce at least mid-table, maybe deeper. So you're probably going to make contact at the very least mid-table or further back. That makes it technically just difficult to drop the ball short over the net and double bounce your return, because the ball's got further to go. You've got less margin for error. You have to get it very precise. You have to put more pace on the ball to get it over the net, but still not so much pace that it bounces off the end. Technically pretty tough. Not impossible, but quite tough to do. So looking at short returns, trying to double bounce that return off deep ones, doable, but probably a lower percentage, lower margin for error, and not something I would highly recommend. Again, this would be the kind of thing that if you've got a lot of time for training, you may decide to work on it and try and do it. Because if you could, you would shut down your opponent's attack a lot. However, for most people, they don't have the time for that sort of training, so I wouldn't recommend off deep serves trying to double bounce your return. I wouldn't recommend it. So, if that's no good, what other options have we got? Well, we should be going, I think, in most cases, if the ball's got that side spin and we don't feel that we're in position to attack, we're not comfortable to attack, then we've got to go deep. We've got to stay out of the middle of the table and try and get to the ball, cutting the sidelines at an angle, or getting the ball very deep, preferably to make him move or into his elbow. The idea being make the opponent move to hit the ball, or have to move to get out of the way to decide which one he wants to attack with. So let him attack, but don't let him attack easily. That would be probably one viable choice on a long serve. Your other viable choice is, of course, to attack it and loop it yourself. And that will depend, how often you want to use that depends on how good your technique is, how confident you are with the attacking, and really what spins you prefer to attack from. Some people find it much easier when they're returning serve and the ball's coming long. They find it much easier to do it off something with backspin, because the backspin helps their topspin and they get it on. Whereas quite often you'll find people struggle off a topspin serve to loop the topspin serve, because they're having to overcome the opponent's topspin, put their own topspin on, and they seem to hit it off a little bit more. So in those sort of cases, depending on what spinner's on the ball, may help determine what shot you prefer. So ideally, in an ideal world, when we all had perfect technique and never missed the ball, then anything long could probably be attacked. And for any aggressive player, it's an aggressive option. It gets you in, gets you attacking. For more passive players, or for those of us whose technique is better at certain strokes than others, off certain serves than others, then we have to come into either blocking or just sort of countering the more top spinny serves and deep pushing the more backspin serves and using those kind of options. Now, obviously, pushing or just countering is going to be a little bit more passive. You're going to give your opponent more opportunity to start attacking. Okay, so in those kind of cases, we try and place the ball deep, wide, so that your opponent can't attack fast and hard. And the idea then is that allows us to hopefully bring in our pips, get a chance to move if we want to, and get our pips into play, or perhaps counter-attack with our inverted rubber off his weaker attack. So those are our kind of options. And if, of course, we can attack, and attack the first one well, we can start attacking and following up and stay aggressive. So those, I think, offer long serve to our inverted rubber. Our two basic choices are, I think, firstly, try and attack it if you can. If it suits, keep working on your game, I think, so that you can attack more stuff. But basically, if you can be attacking the ball, you're going to be more in control of the rally, which is good. If you push or just counter hit or block a lot of the serves, you'll allow your opponent to get in more often and you'll be playing a more passive game. Which, if you're a more passive player, that may suit you. But even for a more passive player, you've got to place it so that your opponent doesn't get an easy, hard third ball, because then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So we still have to make it difficult. We want to make our opponent struggle to hit power third balls. We want to make him move and hit so that we can start to play our rallying game and get into it. Okay? Double bouncing the return. Obviously, if you can do it, it's great, but technically difficult to perform. And in terms of if you've only got an hour or two to train a week, probably not something worth working on, because you just won't have enough time to master it. There are better things that you could be spending your time on. So those I guess are, I think, what we have in terms of our inverted return of serves against long balls. Basically a good loop attack. Now, I think I should probably mention in terms of what type of loop attack. Do you go as hard as you can? Do you go with a spinnier one with a little bit less pace? Or do you go with very, very safe? And I think to an extent it depends on your technique. It also depends on what kind of rally you like to play and what your follow-up is. For example, what I mean by that is if you like to hit with a lot of power but you don't like to rally a lot, you like to hit a winner basically, then off those long serves you may be going very fast, very hard, trying to bash a winner. Okay? Not so much of a margin for error, it's lower. It's not necessarily low percentage. If your technique is good, it may not be low percentage, but it will be a lower percentage shot than someone who gives it a bit more spin and a bit more height on the table and a little bit less pace so that it has time to drop. So if you're a hitting winners kind of person, who puts it all in, then you may want to hit bang. If you're someone with pretty good technique and likes to keep following up, you may off the serve hit a safer, slightly less power, more spin, a little bit higher over the net, land the ball not right on the end line but a little bit further in, and get the attack started, make your opponent hopefully block the ball. You may try and counter loop, but that would be it's always going to be difficult off a decent loop of your own. So hopefully your opponent's going to be blocking and the block will come up higher than the serve will, and now you can hopefully bring in the power on your fourth ball and do that. So that would be a good option as well. It really depends on how you like to rally. What kind of rallies do you like to play? For more passive players who don't really want to attack very much, again, they're not probably going to be attacking unless it's very, very easy anyway. So how hard you go on the return of serve attack depends on whether you're trying to hit a winner through or whether you want to get the attack started and hit the winner off the next ball. It depends on what you're comfortable with. Whether you're very good off a block ball. If you're great off a block ball, just an ordinary block from your opponent, then you hit the first one heavy spin and safer, get the block, put it away. If you're much better off a backspin ball than a block ball, then you're probably better off if the opponent serves a long backspin ball to try and hit that for the winner. Because otherwise when he blocks, you're not getting your favourite ball. And of course this is the sort of thing where you say, that's where you are now, but hopefully it would be better in the long term to improve your technique so that instead of being only good against a backspin ball, you're also good against a block ball. That way you can choose whatever return you feel like and you're not forced to play certain ways because of limitations in your technique. So that's where the long-term goal of being able to play just as well off a backspin ball against a block ball or a topspin ball. If you can do all three, you have more options. Okay, so enough about long serves. I think I've covered enough there to get us started. Let's talk a little bit about the double bounce serves to your inverted rubber. And again, it's going to come down to how you want the rally to continue. Do you want to shut down the rally and keep it into a pushing rally, an over-the-table rally, and are you trying to stop your opponent getting an attack in at all so that you're both hopefully pushing and you've got the maximum chance to confuse him with your rubbers and get him to make mistakes? So that's one extreme, shutting down the attack completely from your opponent. Now whether you do that so that you can just keep until he makes a mistake, or you shut him down so that hopefully he puts one long and you can attack, two different aspects. But the return of serve would be similar, because in both cases you're trying to stop your opponent attacking. In one case, so that you can play lots and lots of pushes, and in the second case it's just so that you can attack first, But in either case, your returner serve is designed to stop any attack. Make your opponent push it, or very badly maybe flick it or something like that, but cut down the attack basically. No big swings, no big loops or attacks from your opponent. So that's one aspect that we could do. Now, if we were trying to do that, what kind of return of serve with our inverted are we going to use? Well, in most cases, it's going to have to be double bounced. Okay, we've got to get it low, and we've got to get it short enough to bounce twice on the table so that the opponent can't actually take a big swing. And it's got to be both. It's got to be both low and short. If you put it short but you put it high, the opponent's got room to swing over the table. No good. Okay? If you put it low but you put it deep, the opponent's going to be able to still swing. So it's got to be both low and short. So only allow him to push or to take a chance and flick. And hopefully the flick is not going to have so much pace so that you can then, if you're passively handling it, you can probably try and drop it short again, or you can counter-attack yourself and get your own attack in, your own strong attack in. So we're looking, I think, mainly at double bounce returns. Okay, with just if he's serving a very short topspin, come over the ball and just kill the pace. If he's serving a backspin, obviously come in and just touch it, and we're looking to return the ball short and low. Okay, cut down his options on that one. I don't think you've got much other choices. You could, to stop him attacking, you could try and beat him with a flick and trick him in terms of the direction. That would probably stop him attacking very well. A well-placed flick into the elbow or very wide would probably, it'll maybe let him attack, but certainly not very well. But the option, a good player might be able to handle it, so it's riskier. And the same with a deep push. If you push deep, even if you push quick, you'll either have to fool him about the placement. If you don't, he's going to get a swing. It may not be a powerful attack, but he's still going to get, if the ball's going to be off the end of the table, he is going to be able to get a swing. So the only real sure way to shut down your opponent's big swing is to drop the ball short. Okay, so that I think is our option. So for anybody wanting to take away the opponent's attack for whatever reason, that is your basically your best option to do it, is drop the ball short. Usually, I think in most cases, if they're serving double bounce serves, most of your opponents are going to serve that with side spin and backspin, because the ball stays on the table easier. It's much more difficult to serve a good side spin, top spin serve and keep it short and make a double bounce. That's pretty tough. There's not a lot of opponents who can do it, I would think. If they do, it's actually in some ways almost a little easier to keep the ball short, because you can take his top spin and just turn it into your backspin once you get the hang of it. I've been working on that a little bit. His topspin becomes your backspin and the ball stays short a little bit more easier if you get the bat angle right. And it's just something to work on. Okay? But on the whole, I think you're not going to see that a lot. What you're more likely to see is you're more likely to see an opponent try and trick you and make it look like he's putting a lot of backspin when he's actually putting only side spin or a little bit of backspin, and get you to pop the ball up that way. That's going to be the more likely variation, because it's much easier to perform consistently. So anyway, moving on. What are our other options? What other choices do we have against this double bounce serve? Well, we could flick. Definitely, that's an option. What would flicking give us? Why would we flick? What would be the resulting rally? Well, if you flick to an opponent, I guess you may trick him. If you can trick him in terms of where you're going, and maybe look like you're going down the line and flick cross court, you have better potential to put the ball past him without him making contact. So that's a good thing. You know, obviously if he misses the ball completely, you win the point. Great. So the flick I think does give you the option, probably more so I think to the opponent's the wide forehand. I think it's much easier to look like you're going down the line here and cross court than it is to look like you're going cross court and suddenly go down the line. That's a bit harder. Plus, against a right-hander, you'd actually be you'd be going down the line, not away from him so much. So you lose a bit of angle. You might trick him, but he would still be finding it relatively easy to cover the ball, provided he hasn't wound up for a big forehand. So probably, the option is probably cross court, cut sideline, you may get it past him completely. Or into his playing elbow, or of course I guess wide down the backhand type thing as well with your flick. But the idea here is being that if the opponent is a good player and on the ball, the chances are good that you may make him move, he may have to move. You're probably not going to get it right through him, but by making him move and hitting it with a flick with a bit of pace, he's probably not going to get a big swing attack. He'll probably get a counter looping, close to the table counter looping type with a little bit of less power. So he won't be able to do the big swing. And hopefully with a lot of players you might make him actually just have enough time to block, which is a good thing as well. But I guess what we're hoping for is either to get the ball past him or to get a weak attack, either a block or a weaker attack. That what are we going to do? Well, I think for the aggressive player, you're going to look to attack it, put the first big strong attack in. If you're a more passive player, what are you going to do with it? Well, if you're a more passive player, he'll have a little bit of topspin. You'll probably be using, I think, looking to use the long pips in that case to feed off his topspin and get that first backspinny type ball going to make him start having to lift, and you're then into your groove of basically making your opponent lift, and taking away his ability to put pace on the ball. Okay. Now, in terms of doing that and achieving that, this is a slightly different, you can see it's for a slightly different player than for somebody who wants to completely shut down his opponent's attack. This one, what you're doing is you're allowing him probably the chance to attack, but not strong, so that you can be the first one to put a big strong attack in, which means that you probably are good against top spinning against a block or a weaker topspin. Or you're the more defensive player who actually wants your opponent to attack, but you don't want him attacking you strong. But you do want some spin. You want him to be able to spin the ball so that you can put your pips there and start making that backspin, make him lift, backspin, make him lift, and get that dynamic going. So it's a slightly different type of passive player. What you're doing now is you want him attacking, but you want to feed off his topspin. You just don't want him attacking you so fast that you can't get your bat there. So it's for a different sort of player, the flick, I think. And again, it's not saying that you never flick or you never push short, but you'll get a slightly different point most of the times, depending on whether you drop the ball short or whether you flick the ball. And so, again, most of us don't want to play the same point every time, but we certainly do gravitate towards certain patterns. Okay, so I think what I'm really, just to recap, what I'm trying to say is the flick is basically going to get you into probably a top spinning rally, hopefully one where your opponent has not put a strong top spin in. It's either going to be a block or a weak counter top spin type thing that you can either get in an attack or you can start your own backspin with the pips working or with the anti-spin working. Okay, so we've got our drop shot, we've got our flick. Third option that we've really kind of got is the deep push. And in the past, I think I've tended to recommend that this should be your stock return. And I think the main reason I tend to recommend that is that in terms of if you're not got a lot of time to practice, you haven't got hours of time to put into return of serve practice, this is the one that gives you the best rate of return, because you're pushing deep, anything kind of within the last 6 to 9 inches of the table or wide is going to push your opponent back a bit and give you more time. Because you're aiming deep, if you miss by a few inches, it's not going to be so critical. You won't necessarily put the ball into the net or off the end of the table. Whereas if you're trying to return short and you miss by a little bit, that's often just high enough for him to attack or just deep enough for him to attack. You've got to be much more precise returning short, double bouncing this return. Whereas with the deep, you've got more room for error, so that if you make a mistake, it's not as critical, which is good when you're not playing as much. If you're not reading the serves so well, you've got more room to make errors. And as long as you get the ball deep, it's not going to be quite so important if the ball goes there, that height, or if the ball goes that height. As long as it's bouncing fairly deep, your opponent's still going to have to move back to take it. So it's more forgiving, I guess, for the average player who's not playing so much. And all we then have to really focus on is trying to keep the ball out of the middle of the table. So it gives us still plenty to work on. We can cut the ball on the sideline, here or there. It's still going to be fairly effective, and that will work. What kind of rallies are we going to get into because of that? Well, thinking about that, what you're going to get is you're basically going to get probably anywhere from a weakish loop to a strong loop. Hopefully not a power loop. Hopefully he's not going to be able to really power the ball at you. But if you're putting the ball in the right areas, if you're making him move to play his forehand, or move to play his backhand, or move to either forehand, backhand, and you're making him play the ball very wide, or from very deep, or reasonably deep, he may be able to get a strong topspin, but he should hopefully be doing it from far enough away that it gives you a little bit more time to see where the direction the ball is going and to handle it. Okay? That's why it's important not to get mid-table, because if you get mid-table, he's going to be hitting very close to you and you probably won't have enough time to really react. So the kind of rallies we're going to get is against a weaker opponent. Well, if you put the ball, he may not even be able to attack it. He may end up just moving over and pushing, or pushing there, pushing there. He may not even try and topspin it. So you may get a push that you can then attack yourself. And because you've put it deep, pretty good chance that he's going to put it deep. He's not going to drop shot off a deep return. You can attack. So against weaker opponents, the kind of rally you're going to get into is you are probably going to get into a push. If you've placed it well, you'll probably push it, and then what will happen is you can now, off that deep return that you're going to get, you can either, again, roll with the pips or use the pips to manipulate the spin, or you can probably attack it yourself. Okay. Against a better player, you're going to get anywhere from a weak topspin to a medium strong topspin. Okay, depending on how good a quality he is. If you're up against obviously Timo Boll, you're probably going to get a power loop. But for the rest of the people we're playing against, depending how good they are and how good they move, they're going to be making anywhere from a weak effort to a fairly decent effort. But they're going to be doing it hopefully from enough distance that a lot of the time you'll be able to then handle the ball, you'll have enough time to do something with it. Okay? But again, so you're giving the opponent, I guess, the chance to attack, pushing him deep to give yourself more time to recover. And, well, what type of rallies are you going to get into? Well, again, it depends on how aggressive you are. If you prefer to shut your opponent down and stop him attacking, the deep push is only going to be effective against weak players. Not so good against the top players, the better players. Okay, so it's not such a good option. If you prefer to have your opponent attack you and start to use your shot, your pips or anti-spin for the backspin, or maybe just block the forehand if it's to the inverted, okay, this will work. Yep, the long push will do that. So move him, make him move. You can then, if it's to your pips, chop block it or slowly roll it, and you'll be feeding him some backspin and some different pace, or just block with the forehand if he gets to your forehand and make him move again, and then he has to move to a new location. Hopefully he still won't be able to attack very strongly, and you get another chance to bring in your chop block or do whatever. If you're more aggressive and you've got a decent forehand or a decent counter loop off that sort of medium topspin, well then you've got the best of both worlds, because if you do that deep push and he does a medium sort of topspin, if it goes to your pips, yep, chop block it, slowly roll it, whatever. If it goes to your inverted, counter loop, and you get in the first strong attack because the ball will be coming deep. So again, you'll know it's very difficult for your opponent to drop the ball short off your deep push, not going to be likely to happen. In this case, you're giving him the first attack opportunity, but hopefully making it so difficult that he won't attack really strong. He'll attack anywhere from weak to kind of medium, and then what you do next depends on really, again, your own technique and your own preferences, if you can kind of follow through what I mean by that. I guess the last option against a double bounce serve is to try and loop it. And by that I mean really if they do a good one that's low, it's not going to happen, you won't be able to do it. But if a slightly higher ball that's still going to double bounce, you may be able to really swing fairly flat and loop the ball. It's an advanced technique, it's not at all easy, and for people who are playing only once or twice a week without a lot of training, I would say forget it, don't even try it. It's just low percentage stuff unless you've got enough training behind you. So, but it is an option, it is doable. If the ball is coming double bouncing but bouncing up high, you can do that kind of swing and basically make contact very towards the top of the ball, but it's a technically difficult shot, okay, to perform. Alright, I'm getting up towards my half-hour mark. I don't want to waffle on too much, so I'm just, I think, going to come back and recap. So what we're looking at in terms of this inverted returner serve for close to the table players, what we're looking at is basically, depending on what you return, you're going to get likely to get into certain rallies. Okay, so if you're returning the ball, if you're trying to drop shot and double bounce the return, the chances are good that you're going to be probably the first one to have a chance to attack. Okay, because your opponent, unless your opponent's also very good, if your opponent drop shots the ball as well and can also double bounce his return, well now you can double bounce it back until somebody makes a mistake and puts it too long or too high. But essentially the double bounce return will cut off your opponent's attack until you or he makes a mistake. And then it comes down to, do you want to be the one keeping it pushing, or do you want to get the return from your opponent that you can attack? Okay, that depends on how passive versus aggressive you are. If you off the long balls, if you're attacking the long balls, how hard you should be attacking, how often you should be attacking, depends on how good your technique is and whether you prefer to attack maybe more off backspin, more off topspin. Okay, do what you have to do that suits your current abilities, but I think work towards being able to attack both long backspin serves, long topspin serves, and more importantly, to being just as good, knowing that if you do make that first attack, you're probably going to get a block. So you have to be just as good off a block ball, being able to open and hit off a block. That's what we've got to work towards. Okay, off the double bounce serves, the flick is going to allow your opponent to attack, hopefully not strongly. You're hopefully going to get a block or a weaker attack if you're moving the ball and placing it well and with a little bit of pace. So it's going to let him make a first attack but not strong, which should allow you to either start manipulating the spin with your pips or be the first one to put a strong attack in with your inverted. If you push deep, you would definitely, against a weaker player, you may get a push. Against anywhere from sort of intermediate upwards, you're probably going to get some sort of attack from topspin attack. And the strength will depend on how good your placement is and how good your opponent is. But you're going to get into an open rally where he's going to make the attack. You're going to then either have more spin to work off with your own pips, or be able to hopefully counter loop on the forehand side. Or if you're a little bit more passive, maybe block on the forehand side to another difficult location until you get the ball that's either easy for you to attack or a nice ball to work off with your pips. And that's the deep push. And then we've got, I guess, I suppose the actual, the trying to loop the very short ball, which is again possible but technically difficult, and only against probably a pretty bad serve. And I wouldn't recommend it unless you've got a lot of time to practice it. But so as you can see, it really does depend. The inverted return of serve, what you're trying to do, should be influenced pretty heavily by the type of rally you want to play. Do you want to shut down your opponent completely and play lots of pushes and have lots of chances to make him make a mistake in the short game? Do you want to shut him down just so that you can attack first? Do you want to try and be aggressive and force weak returns from your opponent that you can get in an attack? Or do you want to let him come to you, give him the chance to attack, but not quite, don't let him attack so strong that he can power loop through you, but let him attack strongly enough that you get some good topspin to work off with your long pips, but you also get enough time to do something useful with them and not have the ball whacked through you. And I think that's kind of your starting point in terms of your inverted return of serve. So as you can see, I don't think it's quite the same. In some ways there are some similarities, but it's not exactly the same as if you're playing the standard two-wing attacking game, because there are certain things that you do want to have happen versus you don't want to have happen. I guess the general principles are the same. It's what you return depends on what type of rally you want to be playing. But the type of rallies that you want to play as a combination bat player are going to be a little bit different depending on what style you're using compared to the typical two-wing looper or forehand looper backhand blocker counter driver who uses normal rubber both sides. You know, we're going to have slightly different patterns that we want to play. And by being aware of that, you can force things more into the style that you actually want to have happen. So I think that's probably enough to get started with on it. Again, any questions, feel free to let me know. And hopefully what I've said will help you in terms of thinking about your own style, how aggressive you are, how passive you are, what type of points you want to play. Think about that for a little bit. Think also about how good your forehand technique is, or if you're using it on the backhand, how good your backhand technique is. Think about your long-term improvement, and then that will help you have a plan when you're returning serve rather than always just reacting. So it's much better to sort of be thinking in terms of, okay, if it's deep, I'm going to do this most of the time, you know, rather than just sort of like, he served it, oh, what do I do? A bit of a plan, a bit of an idea of what your goal is going to help you a lot more. So thanks for listening, and I'll wrap it up there. Hopefully more videos to come in the near future. Thank you.